Hola, amigues, amics. A aquestes alçades ja m'haurem sentit dir moltes vegades que estic molt emocionat i molt impressionat de tenir el nostre convidat aquí, però és que realment estem fent la nostra millor tasca perquè aquestes entrevistes siguin el més fascinants també per a totes i tots vosaltres. Avui, amb motiu del Messies de Handel en la versió arranjada per Mozart, no podríem estar més contents de tenir a l'icònic director d'escena, Bob Wilson. Mr. Wilson, thank you very much for being here. I wanted to ask you a question, which is that you started studying architecture, and was it there that you decided to be a stage director?
Well, when I was studying in school and studying architecture, I also studied business administration. I was in a pre-law program. I really had no idea what I would do in life, and the least thing I thought about was theater. I didn't really know theater. I grew up in a small town in Texas and came to New York to study architecture and went to the theater and didn't like it. And it was by accident that I started working. I made a play with a deaf-mute boy that was 7 hours long and silent. And it went to Paris and was supposed to be performed 2 times, and we played 5.5 months.
Wow.
To a 7-hour play in silence, and my career was established. And I first thought, well, I didn't know anything about theater, that I couldn't imagine making another work, but I've been doing it ever since.
That's amazing. I mean, to think that you could have been studying law and now you could be a lawyer like me, and I'm very, very happy that instead you chose this this path, because the wall won an icon that day. But you said that curiously you didn't like theater, and how about opera? Because you also kind of
oh, I liked opera less.
Wow. No. And yet here we are.
No, I thought it was grotesque. It was, I don't know, I didn't like the stage look. I didn't like the way the singers performed. I'd rather go to a park and watch people.
Way more lively, for sure.
Well, it was more interesting than to see these overweight singers overacting and grotesque costumes and scenery, terrible light, and I was more interested in go to a museum and see classical painting or contemporary painting. Then I became very interested in the work of George Balanchine and the neoclassic ballet, and the way he constructed time and space, and especially the abstract ballets. That's what really drew me to the theater, is watching George Balanchine. That's
amazing. So let's say ballet was really the door to many, many projects that came later.
Yes.
Amazing. And how do you think architecture really informs your work throughout your entire career?
Well, studying architecture gave me a good foundation to frame my thoughts, to structure my thoughts. It is why I was attracted to Mozart's version of Handel's Messiah. It's that it's pure architecture. It's in terms of the constructions, in terms of the mathematics, in terms of the way it's written. You have so much space in this work. It's abstract in its construction in some ways. I mean, it's there's no Jesus Christ, there's no story to follow. So for a director, you have a tremendous amount of freedom. There's a soprano, there's a bass, that there's a tenor, but we don't know who the bass is, we don't know who the soprano is. So I think it's an important work in many ways. One, with the terrible times we're going through right now, with the situation in the Middle East, with what is happening with the wars and the religious conflict. This is not a religious work. It's a spiritual work. Mm-hmm. And I think that this work, if we see it in that context as a spiritual work, is something that's very important to be heard today. I grew up in Texas in a small town, and I was fortunate to become a part of the Black community and the Afro-American community. And I'm especially attracted to the music of the Afro-Americans. And the Afro-Americans are a race of people that were enslaved, were beaten, chained, not allowed to read a book except the Bible. And they wrote a body of music, the Negro spirituals, which are about hope. And in this body of music, you can't find one song that's negative. There's not one song of protest. A race of people living under terrible conditions wrote a spiritual body of music that is about hope. And to me, that's what the Messiah is in its simplest way. It's a joyous celebration. And I think it's a work that's important to be heard today. And I'm attracted to it because of my architectural background and how it's constructed. I made an opera called Einstein on the Beach. In fact, we did it here in this theater. And it was constructed abstractly. 4 acts and 3 themes, A, B, and C, that repeated in each act with theme and variation. And in some ways, it's very similar to what Mozart did with Handel's Messiah.
True. And you will be also in charge not only of the stage direction, but also the settings and the light. I assume everything tells a story by itself, and you really have to just have them all so well collated between them. And
well, myself, it's to make a work. I think about all of the elements that make theater at once. So from the very first day, I light. Most directors find a play or an opera, they design it, then they direct it, and 2 weeks before they open, they light. But I start with light first. Uh-huh. So, and that also came from my architectural background. My first year in architecture school, there was a lecture by the American architect Louis Kahn. And the first line he said, my first day in school, students, start with light. And that had a profound influence on me. So light is what creates space. Einstein said, light is the measure of all things. And without light, there is no space. So I start with the light first, but I also work with makeup from the beginning. Mm-hmm. I work with the stage set. All theater for me is dance. So even if one is standing, one's moving. It's a kind of dance. I work on all of the elements at the same time.
And let me take you down on a trip down memory road. You were saying before New York before, and I was thinking also great names with you have worked with, like Philip Glass or Cunningham. How was that time? Was it so vibrant? Was it so interesting to be working with these people in new operas, in ballets?
Well, I came to New York in the early 60s, and I lived in Lower Manhattan in a factory space, and we were a kind of community of artists, and there were architects, there were dancers, choreographers, sculptors, painters, writers, poets, and there wasn't so much division. It was more a Renaissance way of thinking. You take someone like John Cage, he was a philosopher, he was a writer, he was a composer, he was a painter, he was a performer, and we didn't see so much separation.
True.
And I don't see, say, in this production of Messiah, I couldn't imagine someone coming in and a light designer or someone, a scenic designer or a choreographer. I mean, because it's all a part of one work, and I collaborate with other people, but I myself do it all.
And I'm curious to know your opinion about how much has evolved this field of stage setting. What we do see now, of course, is very different to, as you were saying, those productions, you know, that sometimes you still see in some theaters, which is very much like realism with the dresses, and some of the productions still being seen are like from the 70s or before. But do you think like stage setting has changed, has evolved a lot, or in your opinion it's same wine in different bottles?
Well, if you go back to the ancient theater, and if we go back to theater of Japan, the classical theater, the No theater from the 13th, 14th century, if we go back to the Peking opera, to the classical traditional theater, if you go to India, the Kathakali, if you go to the Greek classical theater, if you go to African theater, the theater, those theaters, there was a mask for the stage, a physical mask that actors wore, but the stage itself was a kind of mask. And behind this mask, we heard voices. And in a sense, that's what I do. I create an image. So before I even play the music, I direct the work silently, and I create an image. And then in this image, I can hear music, I can hear a text, and so in that sense, what I do is to create a stage image that is a kind of mask for something that we hear. And in contemporary theater, the theater we see today, if you go to the opera tonight, if you go to the theater, what you see is illustrating what you're hearing, is seconding. The stage set, they call it stage decoration. Burn the schools of theater decoration. We don't need decoration in the theater. Theater should be architectural, as it once was.
True. And hence a full circle with your studies at the very beginning. Just to not take you more time, because you're very busy with the Messiah. Any production that has influenced you, or that it really marked you for whatever reason, that you still treasure, or?
Well, I think certainly, as I said, the ballets of Balanchine, Symphony in C, Serenade, the works of Merce Cunningham in the early 60s, 70s. I was a big fan of Giorgio Strehler and Visconti. I was very much influenced when I went to the Far East by the Balinese and Indonesian theater. I've been for the last 30-something years to Bali. A Balinese dancer will know 250 different ways of moving their eyes as a theatrical language. So if you go to Juilliard School of Music, there's not one class about
Balinese
moving
dancing.
the eyes, but the eyes are a theatrical language.
Yeah.
And so we've forgotten this language, or it's not really included in contemporary thinking. That if you go to the No theater, the first thing you do if you're 3 or 4 years old and you start training is to stand. You have to learn to stand. What opera school, what theater school do you know that's teaching how to stand on stage? They all have to stand, but it's something that is not thought about. So in some ways, my theater has been called avant-garde or whatever. It's actually quite connected to ancient and traditional theater in those senses.
Thank you very much for your time,
you.
Mr. Wilson. We have loved to celebrate your career. Thank you very much for being here for us.
Thank you.
See you. Gracias, amics.